Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the Honest Youth Pastor YouTube channel, the channel that helps believers use biblical discernment in all aspects of life. Tonight, we will be going live with Gabe and Matt, talking about the clip that you probably saw over on Instagram. We'll be watching the full clip, getting the context behind it, and diving into a lot of the comments that we had on the actual clip. And I'm sure Gabe will be able to kind of go through and talk about some of those. And it's a rare experience that we get to have somebody on the live that the video clips that we use in those reels are from. So, guys, if you like this video, that kind of thing, make sure you give it a thumbs up. If you think people will find this interesting, make sure you share it. But let's jump into it. Tonight we got Matt, and Gabe is our guest. Gabe, how you doing?
Doing fine. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you for jumping on. Like I said before, it's a rare experience that somebody can come on and actually give us some background and some context to the clips that we use, because a lot of times, because of the awesomeness of the internet, everything has to be fit into a minute and 30 seconds, which is not cool, but that's the world we live in, I guess, now.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
You want to introduce yourself real quick a little bit for people that may not know you before we watch the kind of the snippet that I used in my clip.
Yeah, sure. So, I don't know where to begin. I mean, the clip on there is from a church that I attend, that I also teach at, called King's Church in Manhattan here in New York City. And so I live in New York City. I help this church in any way that I can. But my full-time job is to help Theos University, which is a Bible teaching organization that my brother and my brother-in-law started, as well as I did 3.5 years ago. And basically, we have an app where people can have access to hundreds of hours of biblical teaching that is kind of distilled in bite size. And it's really just for kind of ordinary Christians and people that don't get a lot of the biblical teaching that they'd like, or they don't want to spend thousands of dollars at Bible college, and they'd like to, go about their life, but also, walk through the book of Romans in a way that's substantial and exegetical and stuff like that. So that's kind of what I do. And I have an Instagram, and because our company is really, mainly on Instagram for social media. And so that's kind of how this clip found its way to the rest of the internet, wherever else it's living. It's my church shared it on their Instagram page, and the rest is, kind of history. So.
Got you. Yeah, TheosU. Matt, does that sound familiar? I feel like maybe you know something about TheosU Seminary, perhaps.
Yeah, I don't know. It's very surreal to hear the name right now, since I'm technically at the one of the only actual physical locations tied to the whole organization.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Matt works with us, and we love him and profit greatly from his teaching. Matt, you're in Franklin, right?
I am. I'm here at the clubhouse.
Yeah,
I am. I'm right in the middle of filming Hebrew 1 and 2 currently. So just went through several hours of filming exciting clips on adding pronominal suffixes to adjectives and nouns, and declining everything. It's declensions and conjugations. It's wonderful.
Half those words you just said, I don't even know what they are. So, all right. So what we're going to do, so what we're going to do, guys, real quick, before we kind of jump in and have Gabe go through the kind of the context of this whole thing, I want to watch the actual clip that, as Gabe said, started the whole thing. I found it on Twitter. I forget which account it was shared by. Somebody that doesn't seem to like Christians very much is who shared it. But let's watch the whole thing, and then we will, again, we'll talk about it.
If you're married and you're having sex, you should be having children. And if you don't like that, take it up with Jesus, because the primary purpose for the sexual function is the generation of new life. Children are not expensive. Parents are expensive. Children don't ask to eat out all the time. Parents are the ones that want to go on fancy vacations. You're the one that's expensive in the relationship. Marriage is a war on selfishness. Marriage works when a man and a woman say, I'm going to lay my life down for you. She sacrifices her selfishness and he sacrifices his selfishness. And when they don't do that, all that happens is marriage just exposes how selfish they really are. What happens is they'll get past the initial stage of individual selfishness, and then they'll get into what I call collective selfishness. And they'll look at each other and say, hey, isn't life amazing right now? We're in Italy. Can you believe it? For 3 months. We can't have kids and do this, so let's not have kids. You see, children are a blessing from the Lord, much like marriages. But children require sacrifice. And there's a collective sacrifice that a couple is called to instead of a collective selfishness. When a mother and a father say, we are going to lay ourselves down together for the benefit of our children, that's what makes a family work. That will give you the love that you need to have children.
Okay, so that clip there got some people all riled up. So do you want to give us a little context as far as what the sermon was, perhaps, where that came from, and then we can kind of get into the riling up that occurred?
Yeah, well, I clearly uttered a blasphemy, and the the high priests of the sexual revolution were tearing their garments, screaming as they strike me, crying out in pain as they strike me online. So basically, the idea, it's interesting. That clip was not a part of the sermon that I was preaching. That clip was actually just it was a prefatory remark. Someone in the congregation had recently had a newborn child, and so I was just letting the congregation know, hey, there's a couple in our church that has a new baby, and I took the opportunity to segue into, we should have more children. And the context is that I'm talking to a bunch of people in New York City who are single and, professionals and not interested in children as much as, even in marriage, really, as much as they are in their career. And so so I kind of live in the belly of the beast here, but yeah, the content in terms of talking about sex as procreation as the purpose of sexuality, that is not really taught in a lot of Protestant or I would say probably more so liberal Protestant churches, but even I can't speak for all, conservative or Orthodox Protestant churches, but I would just say that in my travels or experience, I haven't really seen a lot of churches talk about this particular issue in this particular way. And I think that's what is somewhat arresting and shocking about it, is that we just don't really hear this kind of teaching. And particularly with the emphasis placed on procreation as the primary purpose, because a lot of times, people are listening to it, and if they're not careful, they're going to hear sole purpose or only purpose, or as though I'm trying to narrow the focus, but I'm not. I'm just emphasizing an order of importance that, like everything, that has an order to it, should be properly emphasized. And that is that sex is by nature and the natural law, self-evidently ordered to the procreation of children. And that is really why it's one of the strongest drives that we have as humans. We have a drive to eat, and like the drive to eat, the drive to eat is primarily for survival. That's why when we're really hungry, we'll kind of say, hey, do you got anything to eat? Beggars aren't choosers when it comes to hunger, because our body is saying primarily this function of eating is for your survival. It's to give your body nutrients. And so, like eating, the conjugal act, the sexual act, is for the survival of our species. It is for the purpose of generation, and that is a very and as I said, it's self-evident in the act itself, because there's no other way really to create children other than the egg and the sperm meeting. But the point is simply that this is common sense, right? Unfortunately, as Chesterton said, a society is in decay when common sense has become uncommon, and really that's where we're at. We're at a point of decay and Western or Christian decadence, where this sort of thing that really was never questioned, even by Protestant theologians up until the 20th century. I could furnish a long list of Protestant theologians, including Luther and Calvin and Wesley, and even other more scholarly theologians that all were in unison believed that birth control was wicked and evil, and that procreation was the primary purpose for sexuality, and hence really the purpose even for marriage. This is even found in the Augsburg Confession, the Westminster Catechism. These Protestant documents, historical documents, they all ratify this concept. And I don't know how long you want me to go on here. I could talk for probably an hour on it.
You're good. So, well, here, we'll get into a lot of these questions, I'm sure. And Matt, just jump in whenever, or you can just sit and watch from your bougie house, whichever one you want to do.
Matt, jump in, because you're going to have to, I won't shut up if you don't jump in, Matt.
Yeah. So well, here's one thing. I'm sorry, go ahead, Matt. No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that whenever we get to that point, I volunteer to relay any questions that come up in the comments from YouTube if we get to a place where we can address any of those that come up. So I'll just
we'll for sure get that far. If you guys do have any of those, make sure you put them down below, and Matt will get those. The first thing I want to hit, two things. One, I think is super interesting that this wasn't even a part of it. This was a side comment that somebody thought, hey, this is helpful, and then that's what took off. That's the thing that everybody's mad about, is your side comment. That was directed specifically at, like you said, the people that you live with in the city that are so focused on their careers and not family. Obviously that goes outside of the city as well, but it's just funny to me that the clip that wasn't even part of your sermon's the thing that takes off. Of course, that's how that works.
It's hilarious.
The second thing, though, so obviously I think, again, you've been in the comments, you saw it, so you sort of answered the question of, well, what about Song of Solomon? I saw that so much in there, and again, your point, and I think you've already kind of stated it, but your point isn't that sex isn't for pleasure. It is that it is not the primary purpose of the marriage bed. The idea is that it's for primarily procreation, obviously, but there's a whole thing that goes behind it of pleasure as well. I mean, would that be an agreement that you have, or no? As far as all the people pointing out Song of Solomon and 1 Corinthians, what was it, 7:5?
Yeah, you could say the purpose, the essence of this of marriage is primarily for procreation, secondarily for unification or conjugal fidelity, and then I would add perhaps within that to deal with the problem of concupiscence in our lives, as sex deadens the flesh, and so sex within marriage deals with the problem of concupiscence, so that a person isn't going outside of marriage, which is partly why Paul deals with this in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 with the conjugal debt, the marital debt, telling people, hey, your body is his body is your body, her body is his body, and you are not to defraud each other from the marital debt, because that could give rise to concupiscence and lust and sins that that come from a lustful desire. So as I just said, getting back to what I was saying, the essence of marriage is first ordered to the procreation of children. Secondly, to the unification of the spouses or conjugal fidelity, and then you could add within that the sexual satisfaction through mutual self-giving. And then I don't know what how you might react to this, but I am sacramental in my theology, so I do believe marriage is a sacrament, and so the fourth or last purpose in the essence of marriage is the sacramental aspect of it. That I think it's a means. By saying that, I'm saying that marriage is actually a means of grace in order to sanctify us.
Gotcha.
in order to make us more like Christ.
Yeah, well, and it does for sure. Yeah, it definitely sanctifies you a lot. So do the children. So two things I want to make sure we get to. I want to get through a lot of these questions for sure, so we can definitely kind of answer them from the comments. So the first one was, and just so I say this out loud, I find this question to be silly, but we're going to address it. So I saw a number of people ask, so maybe the whole Genesis 1:28, go forth and multiply thing, well, that was a time and place for that, and they needed to do that to go forth and do that, and so they're saying, well, it would be possible for that to be taken out of context to say, oh, well, this is now what everyone's supposed to do. How would you react to that? In regards to saying, well, this was for them because the world needed to be populated, and therefore now that we have a lot of population, we do not need to do that anymore. We can adopt children. I saw that stated at least half a dozen times.
Well, if it's coming from a Christian, that's a very carnal perspective, and I mean that only in the sense that it's not an eternal perspective. An eternal perspective looks at a child as an eternal soul that is born in time, but meant and purposed for eternity. We are meant to fill not the earth as we live in it here. We are meant to fill eternity. And so there's an opportunity for people to literally participate in the co-creation of God through childbirth that brings eternal souls into the world. And by bringing an eternal soul into the world, you are potentially, at least, if you raise your child in the fear and the admonition of the Lord, and if God gives that person the grace, they could become an eternal soul in everlasting life. So it's not simply God loves life. It's not simply an issue of fill the earth and, taking a look around and saying, well, the earth seems full to me. It's actually more of an issue of filling heaven, because it's also important to realize that that Genesis chapter 1 falls within the framework of the Edenic covenant. And the Edenic covenant is antecedent to the Adamic covenant, which it's pre-fall. It's a pattern that, as Christ said about marriage in Matthew chapter 19, from the beginning it was not so. So this is the Edenic covenant is pointing to the eternal purposes of God for man. And so it really is quite important as it pertains to our nature as human beings. And so I would just say that there's a little bit of complication only in the sense that the Edenic covenant is not the fulfillment of the covenants of God, but it is a means by which even Jesus himself referenced to point to our purpose. And Jesus says, when he points to Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, for the purpose of marriage, that the two shall become one flesh. This is the original intent of God over creation. So it should not be abrogated. And it has not been abrogated, because what you'll find is that through each covenant, there is a there is the language of multiplication and fruitfulness. If you examine almost every covenant, the covenant with Noah in Genesis chapter 9, he says once again, he iterates or reiterates his words to Adam and Eve in Genesis 1:28, and in Genesis chapter 9, God says to Noah twice, "Be fruitful and multiply. Be fruitful and multiply." And so fill the earth. And then, Abraham, God's talking about his descendants being as, he first promises him a son, and then he talks about his descendants being as the sand on the seashore and the stars in heaven. And so this is all generational language. Even the Davidic covenant, well, certainly the Palestinian covenant talks about this. In the Palestinian covenant, in Deuteronomy 7, God says, if you keep the words of my covenant, you will be blessed, and I will bless your womb. In Deuteronomy chapter 7, the wombs of the women will be blessed. And then in Deuteronomy 28, in the curses, he says, if you disobey me, I'm going to curse the wombs of the women who disobey me. So God promises blessing upon the wombs and for obedience, and curses upon the wombs for disobedience. And that's the Palestinian covenant, or sorry, the Mosaic and Palestinian covenants. I suppose I'm meshing them together there, but and then the Davidic covenant is all about the generation of the house of David, which is bringing life into the world through, bringing Jesus into the world, bringing the Messiah through the lineage of David, through the children of David, so that when Jesus comes to the world, he is called the Son of David. And then obviously we have Mary. I mean, this is partly a problem with, again, certain liberal Protestants, but also, just cutting Mary out of the narrative kind of hurts us a little bit, because Mary is kind of this Hannah type figure, but certainly also this Eve figure, Eve being called the mother. Notice that language. Adam names Eve the mother of all the living. So she's pointing to maternity, pointing to generation, as this archetype of a woman. But then we have Mary, and her whole claim to fame is that she has a child. Obviously, the child is Jesus, but Mary is exalted as a human, not as a god, but as a human in a honored status. Blessed are you among women. Well, she's blessed among women because of the fruit of her womb.
Yeah.
So it's all this. This language is all through Scripture as it pertains to actually having children and the blessing of having children. Never once in Scripture is having children a curse.
Yeah.
It's always referred to as a blessing. Psalm 127. It says, "Happy is the man who has a quiver full." Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying there's a literal number, but
yeah.
But certainly, barrenness in Scripture is not blessed.
That was definitely one of the questions. I think maybe more sarcastic than anything, but how much is enough? It was just, again, somebody going so far overboard. So on that note, though, there is a connective question that seemed to come up a lot. I don't know if you saw it or not. It was dealing with infertility or the inability to have children. And they, again, I think, as you mentioned before, it was just a matter of people hearing this maybe through the lenses of how they wanted to hear it. But how would you address that? Somebody goes, well, we can't for health reasons, or we can't because of infertility. How does your comments apply to them, if at all?
Well, I would look at that as unfortunate, obviously, terrible, obviously, a tragedy. And I would say that it's also not, as it pertains to nature, it is not normal for that to take place. So it would be an accident it would not be something that is normal, that should be expected. We do expect, wombs to bear children, and the sexual act to be fruitful. In terms of dealing with that, well, I suppose I would just say I would say what I would say to any person who goes through some sort of sexual crisis, as it pertains to the fact that they are unmarried and they want to be married, or perhaps they feel themselves attracted to the same sex and they can't righteously act on that, and they have to recognize that that's an intrinsically disordered desire within them. Any sort of sexual brokenness at all, I would say the same thing to everyone who deals with any sort of sexual brokenness, which is unite yourself to the cross of Christ. As a Christian, our purpose is to find our peace in the suffering of Christ. That when we suffer, we point it. We point ourselves. We are to sacrifice our suffering to the Lord, as Jesus sacrificed himself. And for us, we are to take our suffering to the cross, and we are to suffer with Christ. Life is suffering in many respects. And so how do we deal with suffering? How do we deal with the problem of evil and theodicy and things like this? I would just say that as a Christian, the answer is quite simple. It's not easy. Even though it's simple, it's not easy. It's very difficult. But I would still say that the answer to human suffering is the cross of our Savior. And so I would just tell them to unite themselves to the cross of Christ, and I would also admonish them and say we do have to understand that people do not have a right to have children. And what I mean by that is children are not something to be demanded of God. Children are not something that we are to essentially look at as something owed to us. God does not owe us children. The Bible is clear in Psalm 27 that children are a gift from the Lord. And so I don't demand gifts from people, and I do not demand gifts from God. I earnestly seek gifts. I can earnestly seek gifts, but we have to realize, and I think Hannah said this in 1 Samuel chapter 2, that God is the author of life. The Lord makes things to live, and the Lord kills. Job says this in his lament. He says, "The Lord gives and the Lord takes away, but blessed be the name of the Lord." And so that's our attitude. That is the righteous attitude that we must have in a posture of humility, realizing that we are not to demand children, and because it is that attitude that actually leads people to essentially justify any means necessary in order to get the ends that they want. And that leads people to IVF, in vitro fertilization, and surrogacy, and things that are not lawful, that are, in my opinion, they are means that people take into their own hands, kind of like Abraham taking Hagar and having Ishmael, saying, I'm going to take matters into my own hands. And so I think it leads to a very negative place.
Gotcha. Real quick, I want to touch on that, and I will connect to one of the questions that's in the comment section here, just to steal Matt's thunder here. But so there's two questions, I guess, that connect to that, and I think you were really clear on that. But just so if anybody has any questions, you're saying believers in general shouldn't do surrogacy or in vitro fertilization, correct?
Yes, I believe in vitro fertilization is a violation on a number of fronts of the purpose of childbirth, and I think it's a violation of the natural God ordained act that we are to engage in to have children. I think it inserts a third person into the mix, which is the doctor. I think it violates the rights of a child to be born of a mother and a father. Certainly surrogacy does. And I think it also violates the intimacy between between the husband and the wife. And I think it creates an industry that essentially is exploitative of women. And I saw recently a video of two gay men choosing a surrogate mother, talking about the kind of woman that they're looking for, so that the child has certain features. And
yeah, that went viral. I saw
it's like
that
they're
one.
shopping. It's like they're shopping for shoes. It's so vile and gross. And again, it's created an industry where you can essentially purchase a child. And I can't see anything other than abject servility in that, and a really dystopian future.
Gotcha. So
kind of Matrix style.
Somewhat connected to that, then, one of the comments in the comment section says, would you say that birth control for families who already have children is a sin then? And I guess I'll just tack on, because I don't know if people consider vasectomies or things like that also birth control methods, but if so, we'll combine all that together. How would you answer that question?
Sorry, can you state that again?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Would you say that birth control for families who already have children is a sin?
Well, it's not a question of whether they already have children, outside of the fact that, given the principle of childbirth, that children are always a blessing from the Lord, there is wisdom in how you apply that principle. And so I do believe in, taking caution as to the health of the mother, if it's threatening the life of the mother, or considering the spacing between children and saying, my wife, I don't want my wife to be just killed in, or something like that, or she's unhealthy. So considering the health of the mother is the primary thing there. But I think the principle is that the Bible clearly says, Genesis chapter 1:28, that this is a commandment, this is a precept that we are to have children. And also, again, the purpose of marriage. Malachi chapter 2, verse 15. God seeks godly offspring. Why has he made the two one? Because he seeks a godly offspring. So the purpose of marriage is godly offspring. This is all biblical language. Paul the Apostle writes in 1 Timothy chapter 5 that he wants the younger widows to marry and bear children. He says it explicitly. I want you to have children, as opposed to aborting them, or as opposed to not having children. So Paul says, I want this. This is what I want the young women to do. And then in Titus, he says that they should love their husbands and their children. The assumption is that they're having children. I realize that not everybody can, first of all, you can't get pregnant. This is a funny thing. Someone said, well, she's going to get pregnant every time I have sex. It's like, no, that's not what's happening, bro. If you go back to, biology class or wherever you learned,
it's fine. They went to public school. They went to public school. So
basically, a woman can only get pregnant while she's ovulating, or, so this is a very limited window of opportunity, once a month. And that's it. She can't get pregnant. Like, it's scientifically impossible for her to get pregnant, outside of a miracle of the Lord, for her to get pregnant while she's not ovulating. And I think that only happens again, in the 7-day window. I'm not an expert there, but I'm pretty sure that's the basic outline of it. So I would say that, the other thing is this, and I'll throw this in there, and I don't know what Matt's a Hebrew Old Testament scholar, so I don't know, his take on some of this stuff or what it might be, but I do think that Genesis chapter 38, dealing with the issue of Onan, I do believe that most biblical scholars prior to the 20th century were quite certain that this had to do with both the act of masturbation and birth control, and that he was preventing the birth of a child by spilling his seed on the ground. And so, this dates back to the church fathers and their commentary on it. But it goes, this commentary on Genesis chapter 38 is widely known, I think, among church history scholars, that it refers specifically to masturbation and birth control or birth prevention, and I think that's even validated in the Jewish biblical commentary. I don't know if that's in the Talmud necessarily, but it would probably be pre-Talmudic Jewish commentary on sacred scripture. So that is another example of what the Bible has to say on this particular topic.
Gotcha. Hey, Matt, do you have anything to throw in there before we go on to the next thing, as far as what he said, or no? Just agreeing, so you're just shaking your head. So
yeah, one of the things that come to mind, even by the day of the rabbis, was that whenever there was a murder charge, specifically of a man, that the deliberation that went in to evoking judgment upon that murder also included the ideological murder of all of the offspring which he did not have, and also not just in the next generation, but an eternal set of offspring in generations. So to murder a man was also to murder the possibility for his family line to continue. And so the idea of reproduction is intrinsically tied to the value not only of future life, but also of existing life.
Huh. Wow. Okay. That's interesting trail to go down that we won't have time. So we'll talk about that later. So one last thing I have for you from the comments, and then it looks like we've got a couple more comments that have come in since we've been talking. So one of the things that I found intriguing, and I'd love your take on it, is that I saw so many people, for whatever reason, going to this idea that, well, Gabe's not married, Gabe doesn't have kids, so he can't speak on this. What would you say to that in regards to, that seemed to be, for whatever reason, a point that people were going to as far as authority, your ability to speak on that. What would be your sort of comeback response, whatever your...
Yeah, I think that I think first of all, that's a dodge, because I think that the question is whether the statement that a person is making is true or not, not necessarily, who the person is that's making the statement. Because it has to, the thing that they're questioning is not my credentials. The thing that they're questioning is not something that I figured out through my own genius, that I invented. That's not something that they're questioning. It's not something that I'm adducing. I'm not telling people, I'm not speaking on my own authority. If I was speaking on my own authority, then perhaps that might be a legitimate question. But even then, I still think the question is if it's true or not. But still, I just don't see that as a legitimate question, only because I'm not speaking on my own authority. I am representing the authority of the Word of God, and I'm representing the cloud of witnesses through church history, including the fathers and the doctors of the church, and the reformed magisterial reformers, and the Protestant theologians throughout the last 500 years, as well as the confessions, Protestant confessions. And so I'm representing a long tradition, a 2,000-year tradition, on top of, I should say, the traditional interpretation of the text, not only the text itself, and on its face. And so, yeah, I'm not speaking on my own authority. You have to go back to the authority that I'm representing here. And if you have a problem with that, then let's talk about it. But I think that's what we should be talking about. Does the Bible teach this? And does church history agree with the Bible? And it does.
No,
I think
yeah.
they speak in tandem.
Yeah, I think, again,
So-
I 100% agree with you. I just want to make sure, again, that people heard that. I think that when they question that, it's completely, like you said, a dot. It's very much like, well, where's he getting it from then? So, Matt, there were a couple questions there. Did you want to get to those and ask those?
Yes, I think this particular question was already addressed earlier, but there is a question of whether or not people who can't have children and adopt are not living in the right way. And so I think that if they go back and rewatch the beginning of it, we kind of address that topic of by intimation adopting when there is no availability for the natural reproduction cycle. And then someone else asks if the principle of origin was about generally avoiding pregnancy or primarily an unwillingness to be a kinsman redeemer for his dead brother.
Oh, in terms of Onan?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the way that God punishes Onan is very indicative of the kind of sin that Onan was creating or was engaging in, and that it didn't. I don't believe that it had to do with the is it called the Levirate issue there, that the kinsman redeemer interpretation of that text. I don't think it makes any sense, because what we see is that God in later on in the Mosaic Law, God has severe penalties for sexual perversion, and he says that certain sexual sins. I don't want to get your YouTube channel banned, so I'm not going to say. I'm not going to be too explicit here.
I appreciate that. Yes, I appreciate it.
Certain sexual sins are punishable by death, and so we see that. And Paul picks this up actually in Romans chapter 1, where he makes a particular sexual perversion a feature in the chapter there. But if you'll notice that part of his prefatory statement on that is in, I think, verse 24, where Paul says that they dishonored their bodies, they dishonored themselves, and I think that idea that Paul is picking up on particularly is the idea of sins that are against nature. Sins that are against nature being the worst of certain sins. I think Dante puts Dante puts certain people who practice sexual perversion in the same circle of hell as the blasphemers, and the usurers, actually, in hell, because in a sense they're logically tied together, because they are sinning against nature. They are engaging in acts of sexual sterility. And so God has very extreme punishments for those acts. And Onan was engaging in an act of sexual sterility and perversion. And so it wasn't, if you examine the context and then you examine God's punishment on certain sexual sins, you can see that God took this very seriously and was almost setting a precedent, as he does, in various points in Scripture, where he punishes severely, like Ananias and Sapphira or something like that. in order to prove a point and to make a point. And so I do believe, and again, don't just take my word for it on this. Study the commentary of biblical scholars and theologians throughout church history, and you'll find that they all read Genesis 38 the same way. And it didn't, and that exegesis did not change until the 20th century, where we have the pill and we have birth control and we have the sexual revolution. And then you begin to see this sexual infiltration of the moral theology of the church.
So on that point, and we got about 10 minutes here before we got to kind of wrap up. So just sort of to kind of end it off here. One of the things I saw a lot in there were kind of connected to what you just said here, in regards to kind of the shifting theological view here. And I saw a lot of, I don't know if they necessarily saw it as a connection, but I think these are closely connected. That view of switching things because of the sexual revolution, I think, are deeply tied to people that were in the comments that were making comments about, like, well, this is just fundamentalism. This is just what he's saying. What Gabe is saying is just tied to fundamentalism, or it's tied to purity culture, that sort of thing. Do you see a connection to those type of statements with the shift in theology, or what would be your sort of response to people that are saying, well, Gabe is just talking about just a fundamentalism that's just modernized, or, is coming out of some sort of purity culture sort of mentality? What would you say to that?
Well, again, I would just say that if you're going to call me a fundamentalist on this, you're going to have to call Martin Luther and John Calvin and John Wesley and St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas and the whole Catholic tradition, and within the church, fundamentalist. Are they all fundamentalists? St. Augustine.
They would probably say so.
I think I have a quote. Yeah, exactly. Well, at that point, you're not talking about, we're talking about something totally different. Fundamentalism was, properly speaking, the product of a 19th century reaction against higher criticism, right? So they're just making the word say whatever, mean whatever they want it to mean. If they don't like something, they're going to call you, basically that word is used as a slander and a slur for anything people don't like, and or anything conservative, or that is, or traditional. If you're a traditional Christian and you agree with the cloud of witnesses of church history on a particular issue, you're a fundamentalist. I have a quote by St. Augustine here. He says, "For it is illicit and shameful for a man to lie even with his lawful wife in such a way as to prevent the conception of offspring. This is what Onan, son of Judah, used to do, and for that God slew him." So this is his commentary, I think, on Genesis 38. So is St. Augustine a fundamentalist, proto-fundamentalist? And all of his, all of the church fathers, again, so basically it's kind of like, it's a nonsensical accusation to call me a fundamentalist. A, I don't think they understand what the word means, and B, I think that they're being ignorant of the rest of church history. Again, I'm not simply giving my personal opinion. I'm agreeing with what I think is the natural law, but also the scriptures and the faithful testimony and interpretation of the biblical text from the church through 2 millennia. So I would probably counter with, the people who call me a fundamentalist are just ignorant themselves of the history of the church. They're probably just liberal Christians, and they haven't been they lack spiritual formation or moral formation in a substantial way. And I will say this. We are in a crisis with catechesis. I don't believe that people are properly catechized anymore. New believers classes, just the general statements, statements of faith that you'll find on the typical church websites. The spiritual formation, the basic, outline of the faith is just not given to people anymore. And so especially on a moral level. People are not taken through the Ten Commandments and explained what is meant by the Christian moral theology. And so we are, I feel bad for a lot of people who haven't been properly taught and who don't know their own religion, who don't even know what their own faith is teaches, don't know their Bible. And so that's partly why I teach a catechism course on Theos U to help Christians familiarize themselves. But I do think that a lot of this is just poor spiritual formation and moral formation.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So Matt, I know we got about 5 minutes here. You got anything to end or anything to add? Any question you had that came up during the time?
No, the only question that I was planning on specifically asking was concerning the way in which this revolution in a Protestant Christian ethic began to change with the appearance of readily available, safe and or cheap methods of birth control. And I guess I was just wondering which one drove the other. Was it the change in sexual ethic that then promulgated this rise in the use and acceptance of birth control? Or was it the readily available presence of birth control that drove the change in the Protestant approach to a sexual ethic?
Yeah, my opinion on that would be that the the state of the church for the last 200 years, probably since the French Revolution, American Revolution, since the Enlightenment, really, and the Enlightenment political philosophies that began to remove ecclesial authority from the sphere of political engagement. I think that since we've kind of secularized as a society, what has happened, in my opinion, is secular society has kind of been on its own, making its own moral decisions without the guidance of the church. And then that slowly begins to infiltrate into the church. And that is what I would call modernism and the infiltration of modernist heresies. Because I look at modernism as kind of this hydra that has many heads and many different heresies, and basically you cut one off and another one pops up or whatever, and so you have all of these various modern heresies infiltrating and coming at the church. And I do think that there was a point where the levee just broke, and I think I would probably pinpoint it at the Lambeth Conference in 1930. The Anglican Church was the first Protestant denomination to allow for and to legitimize the use of contraceptives. And so after that, I think one after another major Protestant mainline denomination began to fold and on the issue, cave on the issue. And I think and that was a very serious thing, because by 1967, I think that's when Humanae Vitae was released by the Vatican. That was seen as a wow, I can't believe you guys are still, I can't believe the Catholics are still, holding the line on birth control, because all of the mainline Protestant denominations had given way. And so and that's where people call me Catholic. I think who is the Ruslan guy?
Yeah, I saw you had back and forth. Yeah.
Well, no, he just I like that guy, but I think he's an intelligent person, and I'm like, hey, bro, like, this isn't just Catholic. If you look at the history of it, this is Protestant. And he's like, you sound like my Catholic friends. I'm like, well, 100 years ago, I would have sounded like your Protestant friends, because everybody believed this. Up until there began, in my opinion, to be an infiltration. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing more and more infiltration and we're kind of living in this kind of dark age, of theological dark age, where we're trying to preserve Camelot here, and we have all these barbarian hordes coming at us. It's like we're Alfred the Great, and just we just have to keep battling, because we have all these. They're trying to get into the city of God, and I think that that's part of the reason why I think Orthodox, conservative, traditional Christians of every stripe should really be working together to fight the culture war here.
Awesome. Well, before we sign off tonight, I just need to put a little line out there and say we definitely need you on Ruslan's show. I think that would be epic if he had you out there. That'd be awesome. That'd be so cool. I would watch that for sure. Yeah. So Gabe, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. I think we got to everything. Yeah. Hopefully clarified some stuff for people. 100%. Like I said, I was talking to Matt before you even signed on, and I was just like, I did not expect the craziness that came from all of that in the comment sections. I thought it was I was like, oh, this is a good take. And then all of a sudden just bam, I was like, that's nuts. So,
well, it's interesting because you're not expecting it from Christians necessarily. And I think your repost on it really raised the ire of Christians. Whereas the other guy who posted it, the Christian Nightmares guy, you expect, the demons of hell to screech, the shrieking eels of hell to come out, because you're insulting their God, the sex God, but it's not, you wouldn't think that it would be happening for Christians too, but it is.
Yeah. Well, that's crazy. So what we'll do is we'll put your socials in the description so people can come and find you if they would like to do that and follow you there as well. So thank you once again for hopping on. I appreciate it, man.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me on.
Yep. All right, guys. If you like this sort of content, again, like, share, comment, all the cool things, and we'll talk to you next week.